Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 21st of August 2024. This is a military aid update. Quite a few bits and pieces to report on. The US, we'll start with the US announcing that there will be a 24th Ramstein meeting. That's where the Ukraine Defense Contact Group get together, 50 allies, and discuss what aid they can give to Ukraine. The next Ramstein format meeting on defense aid for Ukraine will be held on the 6th of September, convened by US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at the Ramstein Air Base again. The previous one was held in June the 13th, focusing on air defense. So it'll be interesting to see that. There have been some complaints that Ukraine has not yet received all of the air defense pieces it was promised at the last one and at the NATO summit meeting as well. And they obviously desperately need them. There are also calls from Zelensky himself and Ukraine in general for nations who are providing equipment to Ukraine to expedite those packages, because they aren't always very quick in getting stuff to Ukraine, and Ukraine can't do anything with just mere words and pledges. They can do stuff with delivered equipment. Now, Kyiv Independent reports that, in fact, Bloomberg reports that Ukraine air defense pledges from some NATO countries are not being fulfilled. That's just what I was saying. So 5 systems pledged at last month's NATO summit have failed to materialize so far. So that's really quite a lot of what will be very good air defense equipment, predominantly Patriots and a SAMP-T as well, thrown in there. French aid to Ukraine, in quoting Politico, says, "Our guys are doing great on all fronts. However, there is a need for faster delivery of supplies from our partners. Decisions are needed, as are timely logistics for the announced aid packages. I especially address this to the US, the UK and France." Remember, the Labour government came in the UK and said we need to speed up what the previous government had promised, and that needs to get there. What's already been pledged by the Conservative government now needs to get there within, I forget the time frame, but they wanted to expedite that, as well as continue to and indeed improve on the help already being given. As for the US and France, I'm not sure about issues in their supply chains in getting equipment to Ukraine. European High Commission's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, stated that lifting the ban on Ukraine using Western weapons for strikes on Russia, quote, could contribute to peace efforts. It sounds a bit contradictory, doesn't it? That we should allow you to be harsher with your use of weaponry in order that peace comes about. The idea is that the quicker this war comes to an end, the more lives will be saved. And we can do that in supporting Ukraine and allowing them to fight this war without one hand tied behind their back. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree that lifting restrictions has a much better chance of finishing this war earlier and therefore contributing to peace efforts. The only worrying part of it is what I call Putin paradox, where the better Ukraine do, the more likely it is that Putin does something mental like nuclear war and whatnot. But then it takes more than just one human being to throw a nuclear warhead into Ukraine or elsewhere. So it's not that Putin can do that unilaterally. Okay, Ukrainian Parliament has ratified agreements with France and the Republic of Korea. The ratification of the grant agreement will allow Ukraine to secure another 200 million euros in grants from France or from the French government to rebuild critical infrastructure. The agreement with South Korea will provide access to $2.1 billion in loans from the Economic Development Cooperation Fund, EDCF, for 2024 to 2029. So that's 5 years worth of monies to finance EDCF projects in Ukraine. This opens new doors for Ukrainian economic recovery. You've got to speculate to accumulate. You've got to spend to make money. Right, the Czech Republic will purchase ammunition for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. That's according to the Czech Defense Minister, Jana Černochová. And then we have Czech supplied Excalibur Army. That's the defense company. Their T-72EA main battle tanks are in Ukrainian service, moving through Russia's Kursk Oblast. So these are the ones that have been done up quite considerably. As it says here, OSINT Technical says T-72EAs from Excalibur Army are highly refurbished and upgraded T-72As. They are, yes, old tanks, but they are getting a good once over and looking fairly useful for the Ukrainians. And these are the sort of tanks that the Ukrainians would like getting an upgrade. Goodness me, that's the cleanest T-72 I've seen. They'd like getting upgrades on these tanks. These are tanks that they know how to use, they can use pretty effectively. And if they can get the advantage of some kind of upgrade to the fire control system, to imaging, then they are going to be very happy with that. So anyway, good news at Excalibur Army. The Czech concern is pulling its putting its weight behind supporting Ukraine. Obviously, they are doing that not for free though. Former UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has joined the chorus of voices urging Western leaders to let Ukraine strike back. Ben Wallace says Ukraine must be allowed to use all weapons without restrictions. So I think the UK contingent here is generally, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, is generally supportive of the lifting of US, what is deemed as US restrictions on Ukraine striking deep into Russian territory. And that will allow UK weaponry to be used more effectively. Robotic dogs, these are being provided by the UK. Robotic dogs being used by the Ukrainian armed forces are on view here. Operators stated that the Ukrainian military already has 30 of these robotic dogs that can perform the tasks that would otherwise require multiple technical systems and at least 3 to 5 soldiers. Be interesting to see how they are used and how effectively they are used. There does seem to be some footage of them being used here below, but quite whether this is all or any of it is in a combat scenario, I don't know. Netherlands plans to buy and deliver 51 mobile air defense radars from Robin Radar Systems to Ukraine, by the end of 2024. This is excellent. So within 3 months, essentially, Ukraine is going to receive 51 mobile air defense systems from the Dutch, and that's according to Breckelman's Dutch Minister of Defense. Now, what are these? So MOD in the Netherlands is purchasing 51 mobile radars. Today, the contract was signed by Robin Air Radar Systems in The Hague. The systems are able to detect small drones and distinguish them from birds, for example. What is unique about the radars is that they do their job while driving on a platform. Later this year, the Ministry of Defense will donate these systems to Ukraine. The radars monitor the environment for the presence of drones, even at high speeds, because the detection system is mobile, and the opponent can find the radar more difficult and therefore less easy to neutralize. This makes it possible to continuously detect enemy drones and then disable them. The Ministry of Defense has previously purchased radars from Robin Radar. These were static and are currently deployed in various locations. Feedback from the users included a request to be able to continue detecting while driving. Further development of the radar has resulted in this new functionality. The MOD is expected in Russia is expected to donate the MOD, the Dutch MOD is expected to donate the 51 radars to Ukraine in the last quarter of 2024. They are going there in phases in Ukraine. They are essential to counter drone attacks from Russia. And then we have Lockheed Martin has offered to sell Ukraine brand new 72 F-16V Viper aircraft. So the Ukrainians are getting F-16s. They are getting some kind of upgrade. We're unsure of exactly what the upgrades are, but it's thought that radar systems, possibly fire control system in there will be upgraded, but certainly the radar, and that'll make them much more capable. But they'll probably be lagging behind the very best F-16s in the world. And indeed, Lockheed Martin is offering these to Ukraine. Of course, Ukrainians to buy one of these aircraft will be spanking a massive amount of money. So, I don't know whether that's ever likely to happen. Now, German aid to Ukraine chips in. He sent this to me saying, "Look, mate, can you talk about this tomorrow? These are my thoughts on Germany and the freezing of their military assistance packages." Remember, I read from him actually a previous post of his and another one talking about how the German packages might be as a result of politicizing the current climate, so that the SPD, not very popular, the ruling party, SPD in coalition with the Greens, are not top of everyone's list at the moment. There is a concern that the AfD and the BSW, these two ends of the extremes, will gain more momentum as they did at the European elections. And so it could be that the Germans stopped campaigning so hard for support for Ukraine, a bit more budgetary constraint. That could underwrite this decision. It could be something to do with Nord Stream, although lots of people are calling into question the Nord Stream article that blames the Ukrainians for it, but it is out there. Right, German aid to Ukraine says, important, a second update on the planned German military assistance in Ukraine to Ukraine in 2025 and the following years. After receiving additional info from a spokesperson for the German Ministry of Finance, I must correct myself and apologise to you. In earlier tweets, I've now deleted them to not further spread misinformation. I gave the impression that from 2025, all the bilateral military assistance would be provided via the G7 loan totalling as much as €50 billion, which will be financed by the interest from the frozen Russian assets. Following the clarification from the Ministry of Finance after my inquiry, I can now say that I was wrong and that the €4 billion currently earmarked for military assistance will come from our own budget, and that they plan to use the G7 loan only for additional military assistance. So that's good. So remember, the way that Germans are doing the budgeting at the moment is budgeting like half as much as they did the year before. And people are going, oh, that's only half as much a year before. But that's kind of their opening gambit. And then they add bits and pieces onto that so that it's like double that by the end of the year. But it looks, in comparison to the year before, like they've only budgeting half, but that's what they do each year. So they budget less, add more, budget less, add more, budget less, add more. The thing that they are appearing to do this year is saying, actually, we can't afford to budget more and add on to the initial 4 billion. But what we're going to do is look to a G7 loan that will basically replace what would have come out of our national budget. So yeah, in other words, Germany will continue to pay for its bilateral assistance itself. Of course, this does not change the fact that, at least as things stand right now, 3 billion less will be invested in Ukraine's defense next year than in 2024. The key part there is as things stand now. So again, this can change as they get a better handle on what's going on with the economy and they go forward and they say, okay, we can afford to do this package and add this. However, as we all know, and I previously reported, he goes on to explain, the Parliament still needs to look over the draft budget, may well negotiate and add a couple of billion euros in military assistance, just as they did in 2023 for the 2024 budget. However, if no additional money is approved by Parliament, it remains the case that Ukraine doesn't get additional, not yet announced military equipment without the G7 loan or a different country financing German-made equipment, as the entire budget has already been bound for next year. Interestingly, I was told that the 4 billion euros had also been earmarked in the budget for 2026. So that's good. So again, the year after that, there's still going to be a decent $4 billion worth of equipment. The FAS report, that's the one that broke this, the freezing of German assistance, on the other hand, spoke of 3 billion euros for 2026 as a 1 billion euro difference. Material that has already been announced by the German government will continue to be delivered, so the situation is nowhere near as bad as I had understood it to be and passed on to you. I can only apologise. There's no need for him to apologise. The man works incredibly hard. I can only apologise once again at this point. Reporting misinfo to you is, of course, not my ambition. It is always great for us to correct. I don't think this is a case of correcting, really. This is just kind of refining and course correcting a little bit, but it's these things become clearer and clearer as time goes on. However, because I still try to obtain the relevant information behind the scenes, and that I apologise publicly, I believe that this shows that there was no malicious intent, of course not, behind it, and that I only misinterpreted the publicly available information. Absolutely. Thank you for your attention, and sorry once again, GAU. What a legend. Thank you very much for doing what you do, mate. Good one. Okay, so it's not as bad as was previously thought, but there are some changes and it's not quite as positive as it could be, right? Obviously. Okay, top lead here and announcing another infographic to show that Ukroboronprom, so the Ukrainian state defense concern, is the fastest growing defense company in the world. Its revenue increased by 72% in 2023 compared to 2022. Ukroboronprom has outperformed American, Turkish, South Korean, and Chinese companies. In terms of revenue, Ukroboronprom ranks 49th with $2.2 billion. So, yeah, really good percentage increase, but of course they're starting from a very small position compared to some of these other defense companies. What's going on at the moment? I mean, I reported this yesterday with Denmark earmarking, what is it, $200 million that will be spent on Ukrainian defense industry. And I talked about this being the most generous type of expenditure or assistance from other countries because they are not spending it on their own industry and then supplying that stuff to Ukraine, which means that at least that money is staying essentially in, say, Denmark, and giving jobs to Danish people and putting tax revenue back into coffers and stimulating the economy. Someone was saying, look, in my thread yesterday, they're saying, look, Denmark really doesn't have a very big defense industry anymore, or now. And so it's very difficult to do that. So if you want to support Ukraine, the next best thing is supporting Ukraine by pumping money into their defense industry rather than going to the US and putting an order into the US. The US is making tons of money. It's got a massive GDP, and the defense industry there is booming, partly because of war, partly because, directly and indirectly concerning the war, because it's not only is it doing well because there is a war going on and people are ordering stuff, but there's a war going on and people are saying, oh, that American kit's pretty useful. Those HIMARS are awesome. Those whatevers are great. These are awesome. And then look at the Russian kit. They used to be, remember, the second biggest arms exporter. They've now dropped, goodness knows to where. People are looking at the Russian kit and saying, that's a bit shite. Not going to buy that. So we'll buy the American stuff instead. And so, the Americans are doing quite well out of this. And I'm using them as an example, but Denmark have a choice of right, you've got three choices. Spend the money in your own country. That's what we talked about a lot with the American military assistance package, $60 billion. Actually, only, $25 billion of that is military equipment. The rest of it is other kind of monies. So if you're talking about military aid package, that's 25 billion was really what the US one was worth. And then most of that is being spent in US, either giving equipment from their own stocks to Ukraine and then using money to restock their own inventories with newer, better equipment. So it's like spending money to upgrade the US armed forces and giving away old stuff. That's the way you can look at that. Or it's putting offers into their own contractors to orders to send to Ukraine, right? So you've got three options. You either spend money on your own industry, you spend money on someone else's industry outside of Ukraine, or you spend money on Ukrainian industry. And the second best option outside of for yourself as your own entity is to spend money on Ukraine rather than go to another country, because you want Ukraine to not only get weaponry, but you want them to survive as a viable economic, as a nation, as an economic concern, right? So they need economic assistance as much as military assistance. Well, if you can give them both with the same dollar or the same euro, then that's really good. So it's really good to see Ukroboronprom doing well. You need the Ukrainian economy to do well out of what is a terrible situation. Okay. So Verkhovna Rada supported the draft law on the legal status of foreign volunteers. Foreigners who defend Ukraine can obtain residence or immigration permit or acquire Ukrainian citizenship enshrined at legislative level. The same right will be given to their family. So this is something we've heard about recently a number of times. Now that's got through, or a draft law has got through the Ukrainian parliament. That is to say that if you're going to go over and fight for the country of Ukraine, then they're actually going to return that incredible favor of putting your life on a line by saying that you can actually have Ukrainian citizenship and that right will extend to your family. This has added benefits of not just, attracting people to fight for you and giving them the benefits of that. It also, you can also say, I'm a Ukrainian citizen. So it's not like you're some foreign mercenary that's coming over. You actually, you become naturalized and so on and so forth. But also, again, to go back to economic values here, you could bring your family over, and you set up in Ukraine and you spend your money in Ukraine, and that will help you know a country who has lost so much population in refugees to the outside world. Okay, now we're moving on to Russian bits and pieces. And we're going to start with Tatarigami here, saying the myth of endless, and this is from some time ago, August the 12th, so it's a good 10 days ago, 9 days ago. The myth of endless manpower. Russian soldiers' average age approaches 38 as trends persist. So Front Intelligence Insight have done this thread. Okay, 1. Russian gains in Ukraine are often attributed to their superior numbers in resources and manpower, fostering the perception of an endless manpower. Our recent research shows that that increasing recruitment challenges in Russia affect not only the quantity but also the quality of recruits. The average age of Russians killed in Ukraine is nearing 38 and is rising. This trend could significantly impact the war's course. Of course, lots of people have talked over the course of the war that the average age of Ukrainian soldiers is 43 or whatever number is thrown out there. It's not always accurate, but the idea is that the Ukrainians are struggling to recruit, and those that they do end up getting hold of are older and older, as the younger ones maybe run away to other countries or go into hiding or whatever. But here, the idea is that Russia is definitely suffering in the same way. So Defense Ministry's data on the number of contract recruits may be overstated by 1.5 times. Okay, but first let's discuss the current recruitment numbers. According to an investigation by the Conflict Intelligence Team and iStories, 345,400 one-time payments were made for signing contracts in 2023. This closely aligns with the 30,000 monthly recruits reported by the GUR. So in other words, the Russians claim that 30,000 people were joining were being recruited per month, and if they've had 345,000 over a year, then that's not far off 30,000 a month. As of August 1st, contract signers began receiving nearly doubled one-time federal payments of 400,000 rubles, along with additional payments from local authorities. In places like Moscow, payments can go up to around 2 million rubles. This is done to offset growing recruitment issues. But what about the quality of these recruits? According to our findings, between February 2022 and March 2024, the average age of Russian soldiers killed in action increased from 30.2 in early 2022 to 37.8 by July 2024. So that's a massive increase of almost 8 years in terms of the average age of someone being killed in the Russian armed forces. To obtain this number, we analysed a data set of 23,584 records from Russian obituary posts on social media, which included both dates of birth and dates of death. This data set comes from the Potaru.net project, which collects obituary posts from the VK social network. Before assessing the implications, we need to place the current situation in the context of other wars. To provide a meaningful comparison, we can look at the Vietnam War, given the reliable data available from that period. Of course, you may remember, was it Paul Hardcastle's song, 1919 and 19? The average age of an American soldier in World War II was 23, and in Vietnam was 19 or whatever. I don't know that was actually true. According to the Combat Area Casualty File data from the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, based on 58,148 death records, the average age of a US service member KIA during the Vietnam War was 23.11 years, a 15-year gap compared to Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine. Individuals signing contracts come from a civilian pool. Although exact data on their fitness is lacking, the World Health Organization reports that pre-war life expectancy or birth for Russian males was 65.6. Ouch, that is low. With a healthy life expectancy of 58.2 2 years. Reports a pre-war life expectancy at birth for Russian males was 65.6, with a healthy life expectancy of. So has that gone down to 58.2 years? If that's true, that's terrible. Absolutely shocking. But don't know if I'm interpreting his English there correctly. It suggests that the Russian government not only has to offer significantly higher payments to recruit individuals, but also ends up with recruits who may be less fit for combat roles, either partially or fully. They are more likely to suffer casualties from chronic illnesses. Although Ukrainian demographics are anything but better than Russian ones, the extensive focus on Ukrainian manpower issues has fostered a perception that Ukraine is doomed due to seemingly endless Russian human resources and high recruitment numbers. This is a super, super important point. Like, whenever we make a claim about either side, the Russians have lost this many tanks, or the Ukrainians have lost this many soldiers. This is a war of attrition between two sides. And the question is always, but what about the other side? Okay, you've lost quite a lot, but has the other side lost 4 times as many, 5 times as many, the same amount, less? Where do these claims sit in relation, in relative terms, in relation to the other side? Now, where things are difficult for Ukraine in terms of recruitment and average ages, is looking bad for the Russians too. Our research, he says, has demonstrated that this perception is misleading and indicates that Russia's ability to conduct large-scale offensive operations with territorial gains based on a manpower advantage is not as sustainable as it seems in the long run. While the data presented may still contain some inaccuracies, errors, or potential duplicates, the trend is quite consistent with demographic findings from other investigations and metrics reported by investigative groups like Zona and iStories. And you can find more information on the data and their findings by going to Tatarigami and finding the link on his thread there. So, as someone says, no, we won't go into other issues concerning that. So interesting research there, and it does look like, we know that Russia's in trouble. We know that from everything they're doing, all their behaviors. Sending conscripts into Kursk, trying to drum up recruits from prisons, female prisoners, people from abroad, people rounding up migrants who have either broken the law or haven't broken the law, but have been done on trumped up charges, throwing them into the war. They are throwing cripples and injured people into the war. Things are desperate for the Russians, and this kind of data confirms that, or certainly sits in consonance with that. Okay, and talking about struggling to get people to the front lines, so struggling to get decent equipment to the front lines, as Leeds. Fun fact, I went to Leeds University for my first degree. They are seriously running out of equipment now, says Leeds fella. And here we have some very old, as is claimed in the original tweet. Meanwhile, Russia is transporting museum exhibits to the front. We saw on the loss list today D20s, D30s, M46 howitzers. You've got the M12 Rapira. These are old bits of kit that are going to Ukraine, and it just suggests that they are in desperate straits. Now, the flip side is that these things can still fire bits of lead into the sky, and they can land on your head, and generally they hurt. So we can laugh at the use of old equipment, but artillery is artillery, and it can still do a job. And if they have fields and 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 fields of this stuff, then the Russians can continue to prosecute this war. It won't be as effective and as efficient as they would like. They're using older equipment that will be less accurate. Although some are saying the M46 has a greater range than some of the newer howitzers. But in general, if the barrels aren't in great shape, it's going to be less accurate. The range is going to be possibly a bit dodgy, and things are more likely to go wrong. But they can still generally fire stuff into the air. But it's the use of equipment like this and barrels that aren't in their best state that lead statistics to be as they are, which is, I've had arguments with so many Russian trolls on the thread saying, well, you said that artillery kills, this is the beginning of the war. It's not so much a case now where drones really have started to take the place of artillery in many contexts. But it was certainly the case that artillery was killing sort of 80% of, or wounding 80% of troops. And they're saying, hang on, Russia's firing 8-1, 10-1, 7-1 times the artillery rounds as the Ukrainians. And if that's causing 80% of the deaths, then how can the Ukrainians not be losing more than the Russians? Therefore, you're lying. You pro-Ukrainians, just propagandists. And of course, yeah, because there's loads more variables. It's not just you fire 100 shells and you fire 100 shells, you will hit 80 people and you will hit 80 people. It's like, no, you're firing 100 shells, but your intel is poorer. Your staff, your crew are less well trained. Your barrels are worn down. Your range is poor. Your accuracy is poor. Your shell manufacturing is poor. You're getting shells from North Korea, etc., etc. It's like, and you guys, at one stage, you guys were using Excalibur shells when they were not being jammed, and you're using M777 howitzers and blah. So you guys are being super accurate. You guys are being completely inaccurate, and essentially you're just peppering. I was reading Sean Pinner, and I think he was saying this in the interview when I interviewed Sean Pinner, but reading it in his book as well. And he was talking about being down in Mariupol, and they'd just be with mortars, just sending the same mortars at the same place and on the bank, and just like wasting mortar bomb after mortar bomb, just pounding the same kind of area. And you're like, well, yeah, you are using 10 times as many mortar rounds as us, but you're not being particularly effective there. And that was his own first-hand experience. So, yes, they are firing more than the Ukrainians, but no, they're not firing it as well. And that's why the Ukrainians are firing fewer shells, but killing more people. There you go. Not helped by, obviously, the Russians running low on decent equipment. Okay, sorry, I digress. I always do. Okay, let's have a thread from Chris O'Wiki, always good value. Although Russian manufacturers have thousands of drones in stock, they're not being sent to the front, where Ukraine reportedly has at least a 10-1 advantage in drone numbers. Okay, you keep having these arguments, or I don't. I'm fairly confident that Ukraine is building more because they are firing or using more drones into Russian territory. Just look at the Tuchny numbers. It's clear that the Ukrainians are having more success, as is confirmed by visual data, more success in striking Russian targets, and therefore, using more drones. And then the claims are they're making 1 million drones a year, plus they're being given gazillions of drones from other countries and from volunteer entities inside Ukraine. United 24's fundraising as a state charity an inordinate amount of money and getting drones, so that basically they're producing and procuring the Ukrainians a shed load of drones. The Russians were claiming they're making loads of drones, but that's not reflected in the data coming from the front lines. And so I think the Russians are not producing as many as they claim, and there are also theories that they might be producing more, but they're not getting enough trained operators. They're not getting to the front. They're not using them. They're not as useful. They keep getting jammed more, and so on. So lots of reasons why you might not see as many drones being utilized successfully on the front line. And here's one that actually, they are producing a bunch more, but they're not getting sent to the front lines. Why is that? The greed of powerful Russian manufacturers and a lack of focus on winning is blamed. So the Russian military volunteer and technologist Roman Alekina notes that Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal recently announced the allocation of $580 million for the purchase of drones for Ukraine's armed forces, with 1 million drones already ordered from 500 different companies. And remember, I've talked about how the Russians they're not utilizing the free market as effectively. The Ukrainians are putting out tenders, or they're accepting drones from all sorts of different places, internationally and nationally. So they're domestically, they have a bunch of different drone manufacturers, and each of them will bring something else, something different to the table, and they'll be using different techniques and modifying their drones in particular ways to overcome countermeasures, so that actually it's more likely from this milieu that the Ukrainians will have drones that are more successful on the battlefield. Whereas if the Russians, like if they made a perfect 100% perfect drone that was reacting to the needs of the front line, and they only have one manufacturer, and that makes all their drones, then yeah, brilliant. But it's not perfect. And they've got one manufacturer that's making all their drones, and actually it's based on 6-month-old needs. And as soon as you get it to the front line, there are countermeasures put in place. Then all of those drones they're producing are rubbish. So what the Russians are finding is that they're ending up getting a lot of drones themselves from like China and places, because the ones they're making themselves, there's just not the technical innovation within Russia or responsiveness to deal with the needs. So he says, Alekina says, the numerical superiority of attack drones in Ukraine feels like 1, 2, it's hard to say, but the number is double digit. And they were able to achieve this superiority because they want to win, not to make money on absolutely everything. Yes, corruption and theft are rampant there, but they understand that not all defense budgets can be trimmed. Look, according to Shmihal, 500 Ukrainian companies produce drones and contracts are signed with them. At the same time, I saw the scheme for organizing the work. There is not only network management, but also development. And what about us? We have contracts, but as before, the special military operation, they took their own and nothing has changed. Although there is enough evidence that this model did not work and does not work now, flexible control systems are needed. At the same time, I was in the Army 2024 exhibition and saw many developers and manufacturers of drones with interesting technologies, and each of them had from 1,000 to 5,000 ready-made FPV drones to stock at the moment, in stock, not in the cursed direction. And for that direction, I am looking for money for drones, and I've already transferred about 200 FPVs with friends. Here is a difference in the management model, and we will not catch up with them, neither in quantity nor in quality, nor in the economy of production, if we do not change the model and priorities and do not move away from the model where giving a contract to our own is more important than even winning. Priorities need to be changed, and personal responsibility of officials must be introduced in order to win and somehow reduce the cost of victory. I talked in a previous video, you can go and check ATP Distilled and search in the AI search that Benny Pie has sorted out. You can go and find where I talked recently, is a couple of weeks back, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, about the what he's talking about here, the manufacturing management models that the Ukrainians use that the Russians don't. Much more kind of like just in time, sort of Japanese models and whatever to manufacture these. I mean, we are talking free market economics being used sensibly here so that Ukraine gets what they need, and the Russians are just not doing it properly. And he said, if we don't change that, then we ain't going to win. Where there's a will, there's a way. There certainly isn't that will at the moment within the military hierarchy. Now, there should that, if it's going to change, it's going to change now, because they've got Belousov as the defense minister, who did come from a economic background. So, you might see a change, but he is claiming that there still is a problem. Now, we heard that down in the Odessa region, the Ukrainians were using a Yak-52 old propeller airplane with someone in the back shooting down with a shotgun, shooting down drones. Well, apparently, just like Ukraine, the Russian military is refitting its Yak-52 trainer aircraft as a counter-drone platform by adding extra equipment such as electronic warfare systems. So that is a report coming from Russian media. We'll see if they have any effect. I don't know where they will be operational. And then lastly, South Africa, part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, has blocked the transfer of shells to Poland because they may end up in Ukraine. So South Africa were thought to be one of those nations providing shells to the Czech initiative. And it might be this that is being referenced, although it mentions Poland, but it could be that that's where they eventually get sent across the border to Ukraine. Now, if South Africa is saying, actually, no, we're not going to provide shells because Russia are the nicer guys in Ukraine. I mean, obviously that sucks. But it was thought that some of these countries were providing shells to the Czech initiative on the slide because they recognised that actually publicly this wasn't going to look good. So maybe I would imagine Russia found out about this and have said to South Africa, if you continue to supply shells to the Czech initiative, for example, then we will stop doing X, Y, and Z with you. I imagine as much as it's easy to blame South Africa here, and I think we can, certainly we can to some degree, that South Africa have chosen to be part of BRICS and have chosen to be in the sphere of influence of Russia, right? So, you buys your tickets, you takes your chance. So that's where they're at. But I think there was probably an element of like, the Czech and British and Americans or whoever coming to South Africa and saying, "Hey, you got a bunch of these shells. Yeah, we'll have a bunch of them." And the South Africans going, "How much do you pay for it?" "We'll give you this money." And the South Africans go, "Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that. But do not tell anyone that you got these from South Africa. So I want you to ship them off to Mauritius first, have a bit of a holiday there, and then dogleg it back to Europe." "Yep, no problem. Happy days." And then you got FSB agents sniffing around going, hey, mate, did you just sell some shells to those sketchy Brits and Czechs that are sitting on a beach in Mauritius?" "No, mate, don't look at me." "Are you sure? Because I've got these pictures of you doing that." Maybe. Okay, that happens again, right? We are not selling you any oil or something like that. And then the South Africans go, "Okay, sorry about that. You're not allowed to sell. Well, you're not allowed to send any of our South African shells to Ukraine." And that seems to be how. That's my interpretation. Of course, there's an awful lot of poetic license in what I've just said. So it is not the gospel truth. I certainly ain't the gospel. Anyway, thanks for listening to this very long military aid update. Take care, everybody. Speak soon. Over and out for today.